Welcome back to the Fourth Way Podcast. Bernard Eller's The Simple Life. Part 2, According to Kierkegaard. Chapter 4, Simply Put Parables. To the best of my knowledge, Søren Kierkegaard is the major thinker from Christian history who has given the most and most effective attention to the doctrine that we have been calling the simple life. Such a claim must come as a shock to most people, scholars as well as laymen, because Kierkegaard generally is known as a sophisticated, super-intellectual philosopher, the father of existentialism, a precursor of depth psychology, a theoretical aesthetician, and goodness knows what all, yet anything but a down-to-earth Bible-believing Christian majoring in the simple life. But the customary picture of Kierkegaard is wrong, although this is not the place to argue that matter through to a conclusion. We shall see another side of Kierkegaard now, and it represents the man in his truest identity, and in the witness he was most concerned to make. In that connection, we can note one tiny but impressive bit of evidence. An index has been compiled that catalogs the scripture references Kierkegaard used throughout his writings. From it, two things are readily apparent. First, Kierkegaard used the Bible a very great deal, referring to passages scattered from Genesis to Revelation and pausing frequently for more extended exposition. And second, rather clearly, out of all the texts to which he gave attention, the one that drew his most sustained and concentrated interest was Matthew 6:19-34, the very simple life passage from the Sermon on the Mount we used as the basis of our second chapter. In a very real sense, then, the fact that our study now shifts from according to Jesus and company to according to Kierkegaard does not represent any radical disjuncture at all. Our focus still is upon the New Testament teaching. It is only that we are inviting Kierkegaard to share with us his understanding of the matter. One beauty of Kierkegaard's work is his skill in inventing parables that illuminate and drive home the point he wants to make. Several of his best center on our topic, the simple life. Let's look at them. The lighted carriage and the starlit night. We quoted and used this parable at the very outset of our book, and it hardly is necessary to repeat it here. We should, however, remember to include it as perhaps the first of the parables of Kierkegaard. Late for church. This little story obviously does not get to the heart of what the simple life is all about, but it can help us realize how far we actually are from living that life. Money, money. This is earnestness. So we are brought up from earliest childhood, trained in ungodly money worship. Permit me to cite an example. The first, the best among thousands and thousands. There are not more herring ahead of a boat working its way through the shoal of herring than there are examples of upbringing in money worship. Think of a household in which the head of the family recommends that on the next day, which is Sunday, all of them go to church together. But what happens? Sunday morning finds the girls not dressed in time. What does the father say then? Earnest father, who earnestly brings up his children to worship money. Yes, he naturally says nothing, or as good as nothing, because there is no occasion here for a warning or reprimand. He just says, if the girls are not ready, we have to stay home. There's nothing else to do. But imagine how terrible it would be if the girls were to have gone to the theater and they were not ready at the appointed time. How do you imagine this earnest father would carry on then? And why? Because in this case, they had wasted considerable money, whereas by staying home on Sunday, they had saved at least the offering money. The anxious lily and the helpful bird. This story takes off from Jesus' remark about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and is a valid exposition of it. Even so, Kierkegaard's story is a way out from the lilies and birds that Jesus was talking about. There was once a lily that stood quite apart, near a little running brook, and was well acquainted with some nettles as well as a few other small flowers there in the neighborhood. The lily was, according to the Gospel's veracious description, more beautifully arrayed than Solomon in all his glory, besides being carefree and happy the whole day long. But it happened one day that a little bird came and visited the lily. It came again the next day, and then it remained away for several days before it came again, which impressed the lily as being strange and inexplicable. Inexplicable that the bird should not stay in the same place, like the small flowers. Strange that the bird could be so capricious. But as so often happens, so too it happened to the lily, that because the bird was so capricious, the lily felt more and more in love with it. This little bird was a bad bird. Instead of putting itself in the place of the lily, instead of rejoicing with it in its beauty and innocent happiness, the bird wished to make itself important by feeling its own freedom, and by making the lily feel its bondage. And not only this, the little bird was also talkative, and it would tell all kinds of stories, true and false, about how there were, in other places, very unusually magnificent lilies in great abundance, how there were joy and gaiety, fragrance, brilliant coloring, a song of birds which far surpassed all description. So the lily became troubled. The more it listened to the bird, the more troubled it became. Now it began to occupy itself and with the circumstances of its life in its self-concern. So long was the day. Said the lily, "My wish is not an unreasonable desire. I do not ask the impossible, to become what I am not, a bird, for example. My desire is only to become a splendid lily, or even the most splendid one." At last it confided absolutely in the bird. One evening, they agreed that the next morning a change should take place that would put an end to the concern. Early the next morning came the little bird. With its beak it cut the soil away from the lily's root, so that it might thus become free. When this was accomplished, the bird took the lily under its wing and flew away. The intention was, of course, that the bird would take the lily to where the magnificent lilies bloomed. Then the bird would again assist in getting it planted down there, to see if, through the change of soil in the new environment, the lily might not succeed in becoming a magnificent lily in company with the many, or possibly even an imperial lily, envied by all the others. Alas, on the way the lily withered. If the discontented lily had been satisfied to be lily, then it would not have become concerned. If it had not become concerned, then it would have remained standing where it was, where it stood in all its beauty. Had it remained standing, then it would have been precisely the lily about which the preacher spoke on Sunday, when he repeated the Gospel's words, "Consider the lily. I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like it." And if a man, like the lily, is satisfied with the fact of being human, then he does not become ill from temporal concern. And if he does not become temporally concerned, then he continues to stand in the place appointed to him. And if he remains there, then it is truly so, that through being human he is more glorious than the glory of Solomon. Although that parable rightfully can be related to Jesus' "do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink," its main thrust stands even closer to Paul's. Let each of you lead the life the Lord has assigned, to which God called you. Kierkegaard's story supports our critique of contemporary liberationist movements for defining liberation solely in terms of changing one's external circumstances, without any comprehension of that liberation, which can rise above circumstances without changing them. Elsewhere, Kierkegaard makes the point even more telling, commenting directly upon Paul's text. Thus, if one who is born a slave, in compliance with the apostle's heartfelt admonition, for Christ did not come in order to abolish slavery, although this will follow and will be a result of his coming, he is not concerned about it, and merely chooses freedom if it is offered. Then he bears the heavy burden lightly. How heavy this burden is! The unhappy slave knows best, and human sympathy understands it with him. If he groans under the burden, as humanity groans with him, then he bears the burden heavily. If he patiently submits to his fate, and patiently hopes for freedom, then he still does not bear the burden lightly. But the meek, who has had the courage really to believe in spiritual freedom, bears the heavy burden lightly. He neither relinquishes the hope for freedom, nor does he expect it. The question which is rightly called decisive, the question about freedom, the question which for a slave-born individual may indeed be called a vital question of being or not being. This mortal or life-giving question the meek handles so easily, as if it did not concern him. And yet, in another way, so easily that in a way it does concern him. For he says, "My being born a slave does not concern me. But if I can become free, then would I preferably choose that. To bite at the chain is to bear it heavily. To ridicule the chain is also to bear it heavily. Patiently to endure the chain is still not bearing it lightly, but slave-born, to bear the bond of slavery as a free man may carry a chain that is bearing it lightly." The wild dove and the tame. This story of the anxious bird is a twin of the parable of the anxious lily presented above. It too derives from Jesus' remark, but, in this case, comes closer to what was actually emphasizing at the point, namely that man can depend upon God's providence and thus need not be anxious in striving to construct security for himself out of his own resources. There was once a stock dove. In the grim forest, there where wonder also dwells with terror among the straight, solitary trunks, it had its nest. But nearby, where the smoke arose from the farmer's chimney, there dwelt some of its more distant relations, some tame doves. It frequently met with a pair of these. That is, it sat on a branch overhanging the farmer's yard. The two tame doves sat on the ridge of the roof. However, the distance between them was not so great, but that they could exchange thoughts with each other in conversation. The stock dove said, "So far I have had my living. I let each day have its own worry, and in that way I get through the world." The tame doves had listened carefully. Thereupon one answered, "Now we support ourselves differently. With us, that is to say, with the rich farmer with whom we live, one has his future assured. When harvest time comes, then one of us, my mate or I, sits up on the roof and watches. Then the farmer drives one load of grain after another into the barn, and when he has driven so many in that I can no longer keep count, then I know that there are supplies enough for a long time. I know it from experience." The stock dove went home and thought the matter over more closely. It occurred to it at once that it must be very gratifying thus to know that one's subsistence was assured for a long time, while on the contrary, it was indeed wretched to live thus constantly in uncertainty, so one never dares to say that one knows that one is provided for. Next morning, it awakened earlier than usual, and was now so busy gathering together that it scarcely got time to eat or to eat its fill. However, no essential change took place with respect to its living, but it had conceived a future need. Its peace of mind was lost. It had acquired anxiety for the necessities of life. From now on, the stock dove became concerned. Its feathers lost their sheen, its flight, its ease. At last it devised a cunning plan. One day it flew over and sat on the ridge of the farmer's roof between the tame doves. When it noticed that there was a place where these flew in, it also flew in, for the storeroom must certainly be there. But when the farmer came in the evening and locked the dove-cote, he at once discovered the strange dove. This he then put in a little box by itself until the next day, when it was killed and freed from anxiety for the necessities of life. Had the stock dove been content to be what it was, a bird of the air, then it would have had its living. Then would the Heavenly Father have fed it. Then, in the event of uncertainty, it would have been where it belonged. There, where the straight, solitary, somber trunks are in good understanding with the cooing trill of the stock dove. Then it would have been the one to which the preacher spoke on Sunday, when he repeated the gospel words, "Behold the fowls of the air, which neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them." If the Heavenly Father feeds a person, then he is indeed without anxiety for his subsistence. Then he lives not only like the tame doves with the rich peasant, but he lives with that one who is richer than all. He actually dwells with him, for when heaven and earth are God's house and possession, then man indeed dwells with him. It means this: being satisfied with being human, being satisfied with being the humble, the creature who can just as little support himself as he can create himself. If, on the other hand, man is willing to forget God and support himself, then we have a care for the necessities of life. It is certainly laudable and pleasing to God that a man sows and harvests and gathers into barns, that he works to find food, but if he is willing to forget God and to believe that he supports himself with his labor, then he becomes uneasy about his livelihood. The richest man who ever lived, if he forgets God and believes that he supports himself by his labor, has financial anxieties. To be dependent on his own wealth, that is dependence and heavy bondage. To be dependent on God, absolutely dependent, that is independence. The worried stock dove foolishly feared to remain absolutely dependent on God. Therefore it ceased to be independent and to be a symbol of independence. Ceased to be the poor bird of the air, which is absolutely dependent on God. Dependence on God is the only independence, for God has no heaviness. Only the earthly and especially the earthly treasure has that. The fireworks and the stars. Human ingenuity has invented a great many things to amuse and divert the mind, and yet the law for this kind of invention mocks the fruitless striving by the self-contradiction of the diversion. The art itself is at the service of impatience. More and more impatiently, it learns to compress the multitude of diversions into a short-lived moment. The more this ingenuity increases, the more it works against itself, since it appears that as the ingenuity increases, diversion constantly lasts for a shorter and shorter time. Let us take an example, where the vain and worldly diversion show itself as slight and self-contradictory as it is. Fireworks indeed delight the eye and divert the mind when the elaborate, blazing ephemerality is lighted in the darkness of the night. And yet, if it lasts merely 1 hour, the spectator grows weary. If but one brief moment intervenes before each new ignition, then the spectator grows weary. The task of ingenuity is therefore to speed it up faster and faster. The highest, the most perfect performance consists in burning the whole display in a very few minutes. But if the purpose of the diversion is to while away the time, then the contradiction appears clearly. As those antic flames blaze and immediately vanish into nothing, so must the soul be of him who knows only such diversions. In the moment of diversion he despairs over the length of time it takes. Ah, how different are the godly diversions! For have you seen the starlit heavens, and have you ever found any more authentic spectacle? As God makes himself invisible, alas, because of that there are many who perhaps have never really noticed him. So the starry heavens makes itself, as it were, insignificant. Alas, perhaps that is the reason why there are so many who have never really seen it. The divine majesty disdains the visible, false obviousness. Its persuasiveness increases with every moment. More and more movingly it draws you away from the temporal. What is to be forgotten sinks into deeper and deeper oblivion with every moment you continue to observe the starry heavens. The things of the world, like fireworks, are diversions that share all the shortcomings and futility of diversions. Simplicity, on the other hand, is like a view of the starry heavens. Kierkegaard's analogy underlines a point we insisted upon earlier. The starry heavens do not represent simplicity itself, as though one were to contemplate simplicity and find his reward in doing so. No, the starry heavens represent God himself, and simplicity is valued only as a means to seeing that. But neither Kierkegaard nor the Bible has any opinion about a simplicity that is treated as an end in itself, detached from and without reference to the vision of God. I think this section was really helpful, for me at least, to hear a little bit more about what Eller was meaning in regard to, the slave not necessarily seeking his freedom, with his whole heart, not like biting at the chains or hacking away at the chains. Because I forget which of the parables it was that Eller talked about here, but kind of just really showing that, yeah, sure, the injustice is terrible and we want that to end. And if somebody is enslaved and they have the opportunity for freedom, great, right? But at the same time, like Kierkegaard and Eller here are recognizing that it's possible to be freed without being freed, being freed while remaining enslaved in a way, enslaved even in a deeper way than chains and mandatory labor, which of course is horrendous, right? To have pain and torment and liberation taken away. But then, what is worse? Like if you are freed from those things, but you don't have your humanity, like you don't recognize what it means to be human, the purpose that you have in life, all of those things, it's possible to be freed from your chains, but to be then encumbered by the universe, right? By the fatalism of life or the nihilism or whatever your worldview entails, like to be encumbered by all of these other things in your soul. I mean, that's a heavier burden in some ways, and a potentially eternal burden. So these analogies, these stories that Kierkegaard used, especially the lily in my mind, but I thought that was very good. And just shows how a lot of times this simplicity of being who you are and being free in that first, before seeking any secondary liberations, that is really, it should come first. And then recognizing, like with the lily especially, well, I mean, also the bird, the dove, just how they are fine and content until some outside source says, hey, don't you think it would be nicer if you were like some of these other lilies? With the dove, I guess that came internally, right? He saw what his neighbors were having and wanted it. But with the lily, it came from somebody else speaking in and saying, hey, don't you want to be like them? So I think that's really insightful into the idea of simplicity. It's this idea of thriving where you are, being who you are, where you are, wherever that is, not trying to be the best of something in the world or the most beautiful, the best sports player, the best writer, whatever it is, not trying to be the best or the most impactful, not to be the podcaster with the most downloads, nothing like that, but just saying, I'm authentic and I'm being me and I'm content with where I am and I'm going to dig in where I am and have the relationships that God brings my way and be truly human and just rest in God. Now, finally, in the last analogy, it was a bit different than the others. And one of the interesting observations there is Kierkegaard was talking about how it seems like, and I was trying to think a bit about this, and I don't know that it holds across the board, but it seems like the more complex things are, it's almost like they hold your attention for less time. He uses fireworks, right? They explode and then just disappear. He's like, if they don't keep those things coming and increase the tempo of them as you get to the end, right, the finale, then you're going to lose interest relatively quickly. He's like, I mean, people can hardly stand to go out there for an hour and watch these things because you kind of get bored with them. I think of TV today, right? TV, you had black and white TV, silent, and then you add words and you add color. And now we're to a point where a lot of parents are kind of being warned, like these kids shows that are out there, that like scene switch, I don't know what the average is, like every 2 seconds there's a scene switch or something like that. And it just goes boom, 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 boom. It's like all these fireworks, just it's like a finale constantly to keep their attention. And I just thought that was really interesting to consider, how we try to make things complex to keep our attention. But what Kierkegaard says is, yeah, but those lantern lights go off and you look at the stars. He's like, has anybody ever gotten tired of looking up at the stars? And I have to say, I have not. I remember when I lived in Mexico City and the school that I taught at overlooked a mountain, a volcano, Popocatépetl. And as I looked out over the city and saw all these hundreds of thousands of homes and this mountain eating my now I can't think of it, tamale verde with bread, like every morning. Oh man, and the chill air, like it was just beautiful. I never got tired of that. And I was only there 2 years, but then in Romania, the mountains, when I drove between Brașov and Codlea, and I'm driving between these two cities, and I just look and I see these mountains, these snow-capped mountains. It's just beautiful. Like, I never, ever got tired of seeing that. And I don't think I ever would. And whenever I'm out in the country and I look up at the stars and I see, a night sky that is just away from all the light pollution, I never get sick of it. It's just absolutely beautiful. And so there's something in Kierkegaard's last story there, last parable, analogy, whatever it is, that I think resonates with us so much. These things, these counterfeit, artificial, contrived sorts of things that we try to impose to keep our attention, and the things that we think we need to grasp at because other people have them, or we need to secure ourselves, whatever it is. All these things that we're grasping at are just fickle and not lasting when you've got God's creation that lasts. And that same God who created this site that you will never stop feasting on is also the one who provides for us. And that provision can look very different in a lot of ways, because we know that suffering and pain oftentimes are formative and things that drive us to the good. And so I don't know what that provision always looks like. It certainly doesn't always look like comfort. But the same God who created those sights, those eternally beautiful things like the mountains and the stars, is the same God who values us. And if we can rest in that knowledge, in that value, then hopefully that will help us to be secure in who we are and not try to grasp at things like Kierkegaard and Eller have been trying to point out.
That's all for now. So peace, and because I'm a pacifist, when I say it, I mean it. This podcast is a part of the Kingdom Outpost Network. Please check out the links below to find other great podcasts and content related to nonviolence and kingdom living.